Welcome everybody to our, we're going to call this a conversation. We don't do webinars anymore. That's not what my guest here and we do. We want to have a conversation here that you guys are going to all be part of. And so I'm really excited to be here this morning. Ben Newton, I'm at Sumo Logic, and my guest here, Robert Christiansen. He's a vice president, cloud strategist with Cloud Technology Partners. That's a Hewlett-Packard enterprise company. So welcome, Robert. It's good to be on here with you again.
Yeah, Ben, good to talk to you again. I like doing this stuff with you. It's a lot of fun.
Well, and like we were talking about before, I'm loving the background. It's a little psychedelic. I may lose myself in it. So if you see me, can my eyes go glaze?
It's
just
my
snap your fingers
Rorschach test, right? If I'm going to say, what do you see behind me?
Well, and Robert, even before we start, I think a lot of people are familiar with you, but maybe give us the 30-second primer on your background. Because you've really seen a lot of the industry and you've done a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And particularly what we're talking about today, I think you're one of the best people I could think of to talk to, about, what's different in the cloud. So maybe you do that for me.
Sure. More recently, I've been, as a result of an acquisition of Cloud Technology Partners, Hewlett-Packard Enterprises purchased us a year and a half ago. I've now moved into a cloud strategist role. I was 5 years prior to that, 2013. I was joined CTP as an early arrival, if you would. We helped build that born in the cloud practice. So our whole goal back then was to adopt public cloud at scale. We're using current modern day technologies, tools, vendors, et cetera, who got what it meant to be in cloud. Prior to that, I had a company that sold Citrix for rent on a monthly basis on Amazon. So you would virtually swipe your credit card and you get 100 Zen app or Zen desktops, and that scaler spun up in a couple hours. And then a whole bunch of different things. I had the largest fly fishing website on the internet from 2003 to 2006, and going to make it rich fly fishermen on the internet, right? And prior to that, just a lot of stuff. A serial entrepreneur. I was a C programmer for 13 years. So I understand at a deep, deep level what it means to develop software and being limited in your ability to scale. So been there, done that in a lot of different places. So happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great. And one of the things I enjoy most talking to you, Robert, is I feel like you understand the technology, but you understand the people too. And I think, in particular, we'll get to some of that today. It's very easy to turn this into a technology discussion only. And it obviously is a technology discussion, but it's also a people discussion. And everything we're talking about is part of the market trends.
It really is. If you can't attract and retain your people, no matter how great the technology and the toys are, they get bored of that pretty quick, because if they think you don't appreciate them, they split.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And I encourage you, everybody who's listening, to go check out some of the other things that Robert's done. He's done a lot on this subject, and I think you guys would definitely enjoy it. But, getting to the topic at the core today, we're going to talk a little bit about cloud washing. And, even before we get to, which I just love that term, but, before we even get to that, to me, Robert, I think a big part of this is it's key is that there's something different with cloud. So, a lot of people talk about it. There's a lot of, we say hype and, a lot of kind of hand waving at it, but we all know there's something fundamentally different when you move to the cloud, and something fundamentally different about that model. So particularly based on your background, I would love to hear your sense of what's changed. Like, how would you say that, how is cloud fundamentally different in your mind?
Well, when I tell people it's a tectonic shift, more so, to me, even more so than the internet adoption back in the later part of the 20th century and part of the 2000s. And then when I was in part of the PC industry, PCs were starting to get adopted. I just look back at those things, and when you go through these big shifts of technology, you get a little perspective. So this is the third one that I've been involved with. And to say that it's tectonic is not an overstatement. And the reason I'm saying that is it's very first time, software developers have the ability to scale their infrastructure. Okay, when I was writing code, I couldn't scale my infrastructure unless I went to somebody and asked for the money, right? And even then, it took months, if not years sometimes, to scale it to where I may want it or believe it should go. And then the internet gave us more of that in these ASP structures and the ability of that, but it wasn't, you still could not do all of the services necessary to scale. So as you start thinking about net new application development, cloud native application development, when an application becomes self-aware, what I mean by self-aware is that it knows that it has a load coming at it, that there's more traffic coming on it, that it needs to be elastic, it can start communicating to the supporting infrastructure, the supporting services to scale as it needs to in real time. So you think about, you and I talked about this, we were talking about, Cyber Monday. How does that, expand at a 10x or 100x ability and then come back down again and have that ability to do that? And software-defined infrastructure, software-defined platforms that are knowledgeable like that are just different. They're different. The developers have to be knowledgeable of infrastructure, and the infrastructure can't just play, hey, my infrastructure is working and it's your job to deal with the software. They got to come together. They got to behave together. So if you don't have a vendor that understands that gets that world, right? You're going to be hobbled in your ability to take on the full advantages of cloud.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's really great. And, you kind of poke at one thing that I find particularly interesting is that, I've spent a lot of time like you I love talking to our customers at Sumo Logic. And and this is something I've done my whole career. My favorite times is just being in the room with people and understanding how they think about what they do and how they the challenges they face. But fundamentally, I talked to a lot of these companies and they were spending enormous resources thinking about how to do what they do better, how to take advantage of cloud, how to rebuild their architectures. And I feel like a lot of times their vendors are fundamentally failing them because they're not holding their vendors to those same standards. And I think that's at its core, what we're really talking about is that you do have to hold the vendors that you work with overall, but particularly the tools you use to the same standards. Because why are you going to invest all this time doing all this amazing work and then you're taking advantage of technology that was built to solve yesterday's problem?
It is. If there was one thing I could communicate to every cloud program leader, jump over to your procurement people, specifically your procurement people who are in charge of vendor management, right? And start getting ahead of the curve and teaching them what it means to have vendors who understand what it is to be in the cloud world. Because that procurement cycle is going to be a very difficult road if you let them say, hey, we already have a vendor with an on-premise set of tools that are already solving the IPS, IDS problem, the logging and monitoring problem, our SIM, whatever happens to be the operational thing that you have. They told us that they can extend it up to the cloud and we keep the same pricing model and we're already got the CapEx laid in and blah, blah, blah. What's happening is that you're allowing another group who doesn't understand cloud to put massive, and I'm not overstating this, massive limitations on the investment of the agility that you're trying to get out of the public cloud or whatever cloud platform you're trying to do, but your ability to accelerate. It will hobble you. It will hobble you. So you got to get ahead of it. You got to get over to that vendor management side and talk to them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Because I mean, fundamentally, one of the things I've seen, Robert, is that I think there's a we throw around a lot of words and we throw a lot of terms, particularly when you talk about scale and you talk about how that changes. I mean, you alluded to that in the beginning. I remember talking. One of my favorite customers to deal with here is Samsung SmartThings, and one of the best stories that I feel like I've heard them tell is they had a very, very successful marketing campaign. They basically were able to put an app of theirs on Samsung smartphones. Yeah, and as I think it happens a lot in the cloud, it succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Yeah. And I think that happens a lot in this, when things go well, they go really, really well, right? Yep. And that's not the way, most old architectures and particularly old tools were built to handle. They weren't built to handle that kind of, crazy beyond your wildest dreams scale. So you're succeeding. You're at the best moment, one of the best moments of being in a company like that and building a product like that. And your tool shuts you off, it doesn't support that. And I think a lot of times people don't know that's coming. I mean, does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. consider the what Google calls the SRE model, right? The service reliability engineer, right? This is the person who has to shake the undercarriage of infrastructure or services for an application's resiliency, right?
Right.
So if your vendor does not survive what's out there right now, what the folks out of Netflix produce, which is called Chaos Monkey, just start to monkey with some of that infrastructure underneath there and doesn't know how to survive that, like an S3 failure on Amazon, for example. If it doesn't know how to behave in that world, or how to even scale up as demand comes rapidly at it within minutes or hours, it will fall down. And if it falls down, you fall down.
Right.
Right. And so we have to get there. We have to start bridging the gaps here. So the key is knowing which the right questions to ask. So, for everybody that's watching, there's a set of questions that are necessary that you have to start looking at with your vendor. And I know that one of them is really important, and that is that, what's that pay model look like? Are you actually getting a per CPU licensing model, which is classic gold, or per server model per month type of thing? Or are you doing a pay-as-you-go model where whatever you consume, high or low? And that's kind of a leading indicator that you're being cloud washed, right? If you don't have that.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think why do you think that's important? Because you talk about per server, per CPU. I remember you've talked about tectonic shifts. I remember in the mid 2000s it was from per core to per server, and that was a big thing. And now we're talking about per server versus this more volume based, pay for what you use kind of model. Why is that necessary? Why does that even matter? Because it seems like that per server is what people are used to. So why wouldn't I want to use a licensing model that I'm used to?
Well, servers are ephemeral. You could have on Monday, you can have a farm of, we'll just take a simple tool like back when I was doing the Citrix model, when we're doing the desktop as a service model.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need, so let's say at peak, you've got, if you're following the sun, you may have 2,000 desktops live at any one time, okay, where people are dialing in, they're getting a remote desktop. This is a classic, model where there's typically a server or host of servers that are feeding out the desktops, and you may have 200 servers to do that. Let's say 10 desktops per server, just for yucks. However, as soon as the sun goes down across the United States, you may drop down to 150 people. There's no way you want to have that many servers running, 200 servers running, and you want to collapse them down. You don't want to just park them. You want to turn them off, so you don't have to pay for them. Okay. And that just may happen in one day, and it may not happen over the weekend. And so you have this ever expanding and contracting model of services that are running. And if you're being charged a per server license, you may be paying for a server that you only use for one day. Okay? And you want to be more on to the point of, a subscription basis that makes sense for the load that you're trying to work through and trying to use. And so I remember that a lot of times the people got in big trouble in the audit side of a number of software companies when they were just moving their stuff over to a public cloud, and the register hit every time they turned the server on, right? And they got this giant server licensing bill. Okay.
Right.
Use, and they just flipped out because they got dinged at the end of the year with like a $2 or $3 million budget bill. We actually lost several contracts because somebody got a bill for old school licensing that was moved to the cloud. They got audited, and it wiped out their budget for cloud.
Wow.
Literally, that happened multiple times. So this is some of the hazards you run into. It's crazy. You got to get that right.
Well, as you talk about it, it's kind of going back to something else we said. I mean, this is a fundamental architectural, concept, because when you're moving to the cloud, I mean, something you guys, help customers with at CTP all the time is you got to change the way you think about how an application runs.
Right.
But then again, are you holding your tools to that same standard? And that's very hard to as we're saying Cloudwash, but that's very hard to fake, because you can't fake scalability and flexibility, because in other words, that actually requires you to bake it in, right? You have to bake it in from the beginning. You have to be able to do exactly what you're talking about, that you have to be able to adjust how your architecture is responding to customers. Like I'd say we one of my proudest moments at Sumo Logic recently is we supported a very large sporting event that happened recently, and basically they had to the amount of amount of data that this customer would produce over in just a few hours.
Oh yeah,
was just absolutely astounding. And the thing is, you can't do that with an old school model, because old school models, as you said, like the kind of models that I started out on, were static. They were built to handle a very particular operational model and a very particular user model that wasn't expected to change rapidly. But when you have these kind of situations, which I think are becoming the norm now, where the difference between your high points and your low points is literally 2, 3, 4 orders of magnitude, how can it's absolutely insane. And you can't just a tool vendor who is built their system with an old school 3-tier architecture can't just invent that. They can't just suddenly accept.
It's so true, Ben. So I think of one of those scenarios like you just talked about, is that the acceleration of the data coming at you. So let's just say that you have a spike of inbound traffic on through your web front end, and suddenly somebody on social tells people that this is the product that they should go get. They have influence. They touch somebody else's influence. Let's say that you do like 4 or 5 influencers, and you're successful at getting your product into the influencers' hands, and it touches 100 million people within an hour.
Yeah.
Which is not unheard of.
No, absolutely not.
Okay. Suddenly there is a huge rush. Let's just say 1%. 1 million people hit the site at one moment. Okay. And then all of the inbound traffic that happens as a result of that, to be able to scale to that. And then all of the subsequent supporting what I call operational model data that has to support behind the scenes. So I think about Sumo, and Sumo is just one of those platforms that is able to ingest data at such a rapid scale, and let me be blunt here, not lose it.
Yeah.
That one key thing about not losing the data as it's coming in.
Pretty essential component, right?
Well, if you got a particular legacy matter that they can't handle the feed,
it just drops it on the floor.
It drops. Okay, and let's say you're in a highly regulated industry. Okay, let's say that you're in healthcare, or you're part of the federal motion, or you're inside GDPR, or wherever, and it's your job to log and monitor and to manage this stuff coming in, and now you're operating at a scale that you've never anticipated in your life. You better have a platform underneath that knows how to handle that. And number 2, it better be resilient across either multiple zones or multiple regions, right? Because if something happens, you want to be able to pick it up someplace else.
Well, talk to me a little bit more about that, because I think I've seen you emphasize that before, and I don't think that's always really brought out, because back in the olden days, we talked about HA, high availability, and we spent millions of dollars making HA that didn't work. But you're talking about multi-zone, multi-region. I mean, talk a little bit more about that. I mean, how does that really play out?
Yeah. So the more educated, I want to say not smarter, but I just want to say educated, more experienced. That's a better word. Experienced developers and system management folks out there understand the power of a truly HA or high availability cloud environment, where that zones are knowledgeable of each other, and they understand the traffic flow. And if one of the opportunities falls down, something happens, because everything's going to fail. It's just going to happen. You're going to lose systems for whatever reason. You want the other zone to be able to pick up the load, and while you're bringing the next one back up again. And this is really important. So if you are a central IT leader, or if you are a person who is looking to be part of a central team, you have the mandate that your core set of services, logging, monitoring, identity, encryption, server baking and frying, all the things that the security, all of those core central services that you need to give to the developers to keep them safe and to keep them, that has to live and behave in a highly, and what I call an HA environment. You cannot have any of those services go down. You can't, because then you now have a security vector that's open, right? And things start happening. The application may not go down right away, it may not stop. You just don't have eyes and ears on it anymore.
Yeah.
And so if any of those vendors that make up that central system, and I know that Sumo is a key player in that, at CTP, we have 6 or 7 what we call core central services vendors that are part and parcel to the overall ecosystem playing together. If those systems don't know how to behave in a multi region, or at least a multi-zone architecture, the architectures that we recommend to our core clients, these Global 2000s, et cetera, it's not going to pass muster. They're going to test it. It's going to fall over. They're not going to release it. They're not going to move fast with the program.
Yeah.
So that core redundancy, and it's not HA. I mean, excuse me, it's not DR, excuse me. It's not a disaster recovery strategy. It is a availability strategy, right?
Yeah, that's a really key point. I think that, that's what's changed from when you and I started out in this industry. What it is now is that, this is not an off on, like turn this up, turn this down. It's literally, you got to have all that at your fingertips. Because, I think that's one of the things. I've been at, Sumo Logic for 6 years and haven't seen where, we came, now like a 9-year-old company. And there's a certain amount of battle testing in that, because you've got to understand every bit of your architecture and where it can fail, and then make sure that you're taking advantage of all those different elements, because things will just come right at you. That we have customers that'll have DDoS attacks, and you'll have these completely unexpected events, and you don't have time to spin something up. It literally just has to happen within seconds or minutes, and that's something, again, you can't just invent. You have to been through the battlefield with that. And to that point, one thing that you said before, and I think is really important, is it's asking the questions, but it's also asking the vendors to perform.
Yes.
And really, having been on the purchasing side myself, I was in kind of a DevOps ops role for years. You really just, you get to a point where you just love a vendor. You're like, okay, we're good. I think we're all good. Let's go have dinner together and sign this deal. But you really can't do that. Like you need to be like, okay, we got to put you through your stretches. But that can be really hard to do. So I mean, how do you recommend people listening here to really put a vendor through their paces?
Well, from my perspective, it's all about a couple of things. Two key pieces. What are their implementations of cloud native services where they're part of an ecosystem? So have them introduce you to a client who has leveraged them in a highly available environment. Right? It's one thing to be in one zone. I mean, we all can stand up 50, 100, 200 servers in a zone. Okay, or set up some environment that's going to perform in a single zone. It's when it's across multiple zones is when you really start understanding, do you have somebody who understands what they're talking about?
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, ask for the architectural design. If you're under NDA with the folks, ask them, show them, get their chief architect out, get somebody to show you what the layout looks like, and have them stand behind it. This is hugely important, right? So any organization worth their salt is going to have that like that, right? They're just going to have it available.
Yeah.
If they don't have it available,
that's a problem.
That's a problem, yeah. Right? So that's number two. Number three, who do they align with their consulting partners? Now, you may not be bringing in a consulting partner, okay, but ask them to have a consulting partner show up and authenticate their platform, right? So in their CTP, obviously, but if you're with Deloitte or Accenture or the folks at Slalom, those are all good companies. They all have very rigorous standards by which the vendors that they participate in and what they roll into. So see who they were related to and why, right? Because our reputation, when I was building the practice for CTP, our whole team, man, we had to sit with the clients. And if that product that we were recommending wasn't working, it was on us.
Yeah, your reputation suffers.
Right? Well, here's another thing is that CTP we don't sell our client stuff. This is strictly referral. We don't get a fee for it. So when we walked in, we had to bring people who we trusted our reputation to. Forget about getting a paycheck. That's completely separate. At CTP, we were all about brand and all about protecting that brand and making sure that we gave the client exactly what it was that they were looking to do that would solve that problem. And believe me, if we weren't vetting that out, it was a problem. So you're going to see the same thing from some of those other folks I just mentioned as well.
Yeah, so I think that's really great. You know, and one thing I'd add to that as well is I think when you have the opportunity, it is okay to ask a vendor to, like, I want to scale up to a real volume. Like yes. I think in previous environments, that was just hard because you had a lot more, difficult change rules and like having to go through a different process. I think today, very often, it's actually pretty straightforward to throw a lot of, data and throw a lot of, work at a particular, in a, what we call a proof of concept when I was doing this. And it's okay to do that. Like, you should be able to ask your vendors, like, I want to send you very close to or pretty much all my data, and you need to be able to handle it. And I don't think organizations ask that enough. They don't think they can do that. And I think you should.
We don't want to ask questions that might end my program.
Yeah.
So, let me be clear, right? The reason why people ask closed-ended questions, the questions the questions like that start with "do you," "will you," "can you," those type of things where the answers are yes or no. It's because those questions are very finite, right? They're not very hard to answer. But when you ask questions like, how do you solve the HA problem? That's a whole, you can't answer yes or no to that. You got to open up the door. Yeah. What is your architecture? How are you implementing it? Why did you do it that way? These are all open-ended questions, right? So we tend to fall towards the closed ones because they're easy to answer.
Yeah, no, I think that there's some deep philosophical depth there. One exactly. You have great depth. You have great depth, Robert. One thing to those of you listening, please, ask questions. I've been trying to kind of weave stuff in as I see it, but please write up some questions if you have those. And one thing I definitely like to take here as we get towards the end here. One thing I know about you, Robert, you care about people. You were helping one of my colleagues choose a hair product before we started.
Yeah, like that.
That's caring for people. But in all seriousness, we did talk a little bit about what this means for people. And one of the things I'm passionate about is I think one of the great things about this tectonic shift is a change in how organizations work and how people work within these organizations. And we talk a little bit about breaking down silos, and I'd love just to hear how you think about that, because one thing you do a lot of is really thinking about how you can help people with that transition and what they should be thinking about.
Thanks for asking that, Ben. I kind of had this aha breakthrough around the people conversation just before I got joined on CTP, when I was watching our clients literally have massive emotional problems with the introduction of public cloud into their environment. They simply did not know how to consume this from their own personal well-being or their own efficacy, being able to advocate for themselves. They were being told to cut costs, to shut down systems, to move to this, turn off the data center, pick a topic that meant either at a minimum, my job was changing dramatically, or at more likely, I was going to be eliminated. And it's hard to go through that. And specifically us technology folks, once we get something working, man, we're happy. Don't touch it, right? Stop, don't punch that button. So what I recognized is that there's nobody advocating for the techies, nobody. And I just step back and I go, you know what? Let's put the people first here. Let's start talking about the skills that are necessary for you to make it, not just make it through this transition, but to be a rock star. What does that really mean? So we turned that inside out over at CTP. So here's what I said. In the hardest time to retain people was, I thought personally, was between 2014 and 2017. I mean, a DevOps person, a AWS architect, God, we couldn't even, I mean, the Azure architects were like rainbow striped unicorns, man. We could not find any of them. And when we found them, how do we hang on to them, right? We're talking about security people and stuff like that. So we would bring in these people and we'd find someone, but we would train them mostly. And how do you keep them when you literally have your competitors coming in and writing 6-figure checks to take them out? I'm not kidding. I mean, these people were actually getting serious signing bonuses. Some of our top people, we had a fewer than 4% turnover rate. And so how do you keep people that way?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's well below industry standards. Forget about, it being in a technology field like we were doing it. So, what we had really done was we made people feel like we cared about them more than their own family. Okay. They'd call up and they'd say, and they still to this day, I still get calls and say, "Hey, Robert, I'm thinking about doing this with my career. What do you think?" And, we just talk about it. What's right for them? Is they in the right spot like that? So we had those conversations day in and day out with our own people. And so when someone's advocating for you, someone's actually has your best interest in heart, they suddenly will just turn off all the exterior noise because they simply don't get it anywhere else. They just don't. And so in this day and age, Ben, with the technology as rapid as it is right now, and the emotional juxtapositioning of, I need to protect my career because if I don't learn something now, I'm going to be left behind, versus the opportunities that I have and where I'm going to be going, what my old life is. There is this gap right now that many of the technology companies across the board are simply not addressing. So this is something that I've been very, very passionate about that. It helps break down all of the communication barriers and the silos that exist between the internal IT teams and the application development teams. That's just at the start. But there's so many other silos that need to be knocked down to bring that agile motion that everybody's looking to get. And it starts with communications. People got to talk. And if they're feeling fear around it, my role personally, I think, is to lower the fear and open the conversation. And that's why I'm on the phone. That's why we're on the call right today. This webinar is to help people understand that it's okay to ask questions if you don't know the answers to them. It's okay. Right. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that was one of my prouder moments at Sumo Logic when we went through a rebranding recently, and our one of our new taglines and kind of like a core part of who we are was empowering the people who power modern business. And I think you even used the term, I think, empower people before. And to me that's a key part of this, because I think one of the changes that we're seeing is this is less about top-down hierarchy driven decision making. It's more about grassroots up, basically collaborative, team driven innovation. And and I think as a vendor, you need to really think seriously about how what you're bringing to market and what you're giving to your customers is actually helping them in that situation.
Let me go one. I know we're coming to our end here, but I wanted to add one last piece.
Yeah, absolutely, please.
By the very nature, technology people tend to be more introverted.
Yeah.
I prefer my alone time. I didn't get this way by accident. I spent most of my time in locked rooms, right? Just programming and doing that stuff. And it's taken me a long, long time to get comfortable behind a microphone and a camera. The introvert nature of our industry is not collaborative. It's not working together. It's not team-based. We tend to want to work by ourselves and in rooms and places where we can solve hard problems. This requires dedicated time. So this balance, how do I take my more quiet natured individual person and bring it into this collaborative nature world that everybody's asking me to participate in, is the big leap. It's the big leap for a lot of folks. And I think that it's necessary. And there's a lot of folks who are outside looking at technology who want to come in, right? There might be marketing people who want to learn these technologies so they can become better marketers. There are accounting people who want to learn these do these things. You think about a security person they tend to be technology based, but they're not intended to be really, really deep in some particular areas. They are protecting the company is a big piece. So they want to learn these things as well. So as you start bringing these things together, how do you start matching the personality types that are people who tend to be in our industry, and we start knocking down those stereotypes? How do we knock those stereotypes down and start getting people to feel more comfortable talking about things that are, so they don't feel so painful when they have to give their ideas and stuff like that in this new world,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the great things about that too is that I think this is an opportunity for people that are in, yeah, we got a hey from Atlanta. I love Atlanta. Thank you for coming on. So, I think one of the important things there too is it's an opportunity for people in IT operations and DevOps and site reliability, whatever it is, to really make those connections, because now people in marketing, people in product, people in data science, they're all desperate for what you got. They're desperate for the kind of data and expertise that you bring to the table, because it's all coming together. And I think it's a great opportunity for you to extend yourself, extend your career, and really, and branch out. And to me, that's one of the things I'm passionate about, is making that easier. So I think you are too.
I am.
So, Robert, this has been fantastic as always.
Yes.
I learned so much today, including, hair products I didn't know existed. So I feel like I'm a better man, but, thank you for coming on.
You're welcome.
And for everybody listening, we will follow up. I think there were a couple of questions we didn't get to. We can follow up with those later, and we will be back in touch with you guys, so you can actually listen to this later and share with other your colleagues you think might get something out of this. And definitely look for other materials from us that we think you might be interested in. Thank you for your time. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you, folks.